Hi Xyy'nai Planet Earth, this is Xyy'nai, and today's episode is on Xyy'nai Keening and stress lock. First of all, what is keening? Well, keening encompasses the mechanisms and manifestations that come out of a given human design when it's being used in an extreme fashion. And is keening needed? Well, yes, it's definitely needed, and the reason why that is because you need to be able to push yourself to extremes if you're an athlete or any other person who's going for an extreme goal, and you need to be able to push yourself to get better and develop yourself. So if you're studying, you need to be able to push yourself farther than you ever have, and farther than you ever knew you could go in order to do that. So there needs to be an ability to do that and to know what it feels like when you're pushing yourself to your limits. So this is, it's serious stuff because you're pushing yourself to your limits, but you need to be able to do that. It's important to be able to do that. And you need to know what it feels like to take yourself in that direction, and the degrees of extreme usage, how they feel like, and understand them. And that will vary from mojo to mojo because every mojo's powers are different, the hierarchies are different, and therefore as each mojo stresses their system, as they put extreme usage on their mojo design, it'll manifest itself differently. In this context, it's important to use the term extreme momentum and modulation because there are two things that can cause keening. One, if you get your powers going excessively and you don't channel them down the peak pathway, you just keep revving them up, but you don't have the engine going somewhere. You can push the system too far, but that may not be a bad thing. When you push the system, then there's a shaking of the psyche as you go to maximum capacity. So it's essential how your ship, stutters and shakes as it deals with extreme momentum and extreme modulation. And extreme momentum is like your engine's going really, really, really hard and strong at peak capacity. Then you have extreme modulation, and that would be like hitting the brakes and your car is shaking as you're attempting to hold a curve and not slide off the road. So in this context, the brakes and suspension are what's going to be keeping you from going off the rails. And of course, if you keep taking that engine into the red, then you can take it past the red and things start breaking down. With the brakes and suspension, you should be holding that cornering, and then when you can't hold it anymore, it starts to lose control. So, it's important to be able to manage that process. So keening is at that point at which you're in danger of losing control, but it doesn't mean you've lost control. It just means that you're starting to lose control, and that happens in degrees. So there's that feeling of loss of control coming up to the point where you're starting to take penalties, like, in an RPG game, penalties for taking in more stress, either modulation stress or momentum stress. Another concept to take into consideration is the extreme momentum and modulation versus over momentum and modulation. So extreme momentum is not a bad thing, it's just intense momentum, but then you have over momentum, and that implies too much momentum. Same thing with modulation. With modulation, you're going to have extreme modulation, which is okay as long as it doesn't go into over modulation. So how should you interpret keening? You should interpret keening in the same way you would the signs of fatigue, either mental or physical exhaustion. So if you're pushing yourself to work out or study, you need to know your limits, but you don't want to not push yourself because then you wouldn't reach your potential and you wouldn't grow, and you don't want to do that. So if it's something you want to work up to, like going to the gym for the first time, as you learn what's taxing your system, you can do it, in increments to learn what your limits are, and then go each day and learn a little more, and work past what you thought was previously your limit. A great way to do that is mojo reading. When you first start, you're going to get fatigued quickly, but over time, you'll get to the point where you can go longer and longer and deeper without getting fatigued. But to do that, you will have to read to fatigue and then recover from it, and then come back and you'll be able to read past that previous limit, what you thought was your previous limit, and then go from there and grow. Thinking of it like a workout regimen where you don't want to overtrain, but you don't want to undertrain, and if you come at it in that way, then you should be good to go. So increasing your maximum output more and more until you get to the point where increasing your regimen anymore will be too strenuous for you. Now let's talk about the powers that you have as a Xyy'nai and the types and degrees of keening that you have with each power. With Xy, this is a momentum power, and so here you're going to deal with extreme momentum. So when you're doing the articulating and shepherding, you're going to be getting momentum from your Xy, so that's a really good thing. So you should do this, but then this needs to be channeled down the peak pathway and done something with, not unlike adrenaline. Adrenaline, when it comes into your system, it's meant to have your body do something, which is really good. But then if you don't do something with your energy, then your body goes, oh, and then it can shut down. So the positive is that the more you articulate and shepherd and move those social dynamics, the more momentum you'll be getting, and you're going to be gaining momentum, and at some point you'll have so much of this momentum that it will become extreme and you'll start to cause keening. So now, when we talk about keening, there are degrees. There are 3 degrees of keening that we're going to talk about. Here with Xy, it starts off with the first degree of keening with Xy is related to heightened emotions and logical immunity, which can turn into hypersensitivity and or histrionics. So when Xy is stimulated to intense degrees, it can come with logical blind spots, and your emotional reaction can become, high-strung. So that's not necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes this is needed. Sometimes you need to be unreasonable about, doing the right thing. This is a problem, though, if it turns into histrionics or your articulation thrusters cause you to become blind to truths that you need to be aware of and take into consideration. So it's not bad to be, in the Xy freight train mode, because sometimes that's exactly what the situation calls for. But, it's keening, so it can go into the red zone. So often people in general associate Xy with loss of control, and because of that, sometimes Xyy'nai or any Xy mojo can become afraid of letting their Xy go into extreme modulation, because there's kind of this surrendering to Xy. But that's part of your peak pathway. That's your source power. That's what your source energy, your home. So it's something that you need to get good at and master that keening process with Xy. The second degree of keening with Xy relates to caring connectivity and at-risk attachment, which can turn into hypersensitivity about relationships. So here you're going to really feel your good code of conduct and tribal relationship duties, in which you will feel that you want to give to those that you care about, or be special to them, or be liked and appreciated by them, or be thought of highly and respected by others. This can come with a feeling of vulnerability, though, because of how invested you are in them. So when Xy becomes overstimulated, it can sometimes lead to being oversensitive and hyper-aware of how you're being treated or scored, and because you see slights in places that there aren't, or overthink things, that's where it can go into the negative. So it's good to become mindful of this. And the third degree of keening with Xy deals with empowered persuasion, which can turn into oversharing or emotional bullying. So sometimes if your Xy is feeling threatened, it will use passion or persuasive power to push over the problem. Sometimes that's required to save the day. Sometimes you need to, shake a person to the core. But you have to watch out for using this emotionality to bully others to get your way. Xy is actually great for overcoming fear, and sometimes turning up the Xy thrusters is the only way to hold the perfect position without getting run over, like expanding your force field. But again, you need to be conscious that, and make sure that you're not going into the bullying territory. Next is Nai, and Nai is also going to be giving you momentum, so it will be extreme momentum, and it will be momentum related to things like visioning and speculating. Again, you have degrees of keening with Nai. The first degree deals with truth vision vessel, and that's where you open yourself, because of the way Nai works, so you're opening yourself up to the truth, and you're becoming its vessel. You're kind of becoming it. And that's really cool, a cool power to have, but the issues are that you can get overwhelmed because of this this process. Your lens can become cloudy, it can be painful, or mind-blowing, confusing, kind of like, because essentially what's happening is, you can be thrown around by your Xyy'nai simulator. So again, it's awareness of what's happening in the process, and just mastering, the power of your use of the power of Xyy'nai, how it works with your peak pathway. The second degree of Keening for Xyy'nai deals with vision casting, and that's where that's because with Xyy'nai it's about visioning and speculating, and vision casting deals with flexing your speculating muscle out really far. When you're engaging in challenging, competitive speculating. So the upside with that is that you could break records. You could basically out speculate anyone, and that's really good. The downsides, though, what can happen when you keen to this degree and go over, into over momentum, is there may be missed meaning. You may miss meaning. Also, you may start seeing false blips on the radar screen, sort of like false positives that cause you to go in wrong ways. Get the wrong conclusions from things, and it's basically this is like deep diving and reaching, and so you need to be aware of this part of Xyy'nai and Keening and how it works, and don't let yourself go into the red. The third degree of Keening with Xyy'nai has to do with visionary ego, and that's because with Xyy'nai, it takes a lot of ego to be the enactor of previously unseen truth. So you need to have that ego of, I saw what I saw. And because, because when you do visionary stuff, you can doubt yourself. And outward, you also, so inward, you need to have that ego of like, I saw what I saw, and just stick with that. Outwardly, you also need to have the ego of I saw it, and because I saw it, I should be the one saying it. The fact that I saw it was a requirement for speaking, and you just need to watch out for that it doesn't go into egomania. It doesn't go over. You need to have a proper amount of ego, a sizable ego to be able to be the enactor of this truth, but it shouldn't go into the point where you're not serving the truth anymore. It's like more about you than the truth. That's where it goes over. The next power is V, and here we start going into modulation powers, which can also cause keening. These would be modulation, like the extreme modulation, which can go into overmodulation. So this is going to be keening that comes from extreme modulation. So as a Xyy'nai, anytime you're doing visceral experiencing and environment scanning, you're going to be modulating. So however, if you keep doing that too much, it can go into overmodulation. But there's a point which we'll call extreme modulation, which we've talked about before, and that's where the keening comes in, and that's not unhealthy, it's just extreme. It means that you just need to know what you're doing with it. The first degree of keening with V is hyper mode, and hyper mode involves with V, that means that you're hyper attentive, and that can be a good thing, but it can burn you out fast. So when you think of things like OCD, which can have been associated, with some Xyy'nai alphas or with Xyy'nai mojos and stuff like that, but it's that Xyy'nai and V relationship. So so I'm going to throw out OCD here, but think of the D. It doesn't necessarily have to mean disorder. It can be drive. So you can have an extremely so focused drive that it it'd be considered like an obsessive compulsive drive, but it's not necessarily a disorder. There's a spectrum there from drive, which is healthy, into disorder. So again, having that drive, that hyper attention, gives you a lot of abilities like primitive perspective, bullet time, fixation of attention, intense energy engines, feeling of going on liquidy autopilot, going with the moment. Those are really powerful abilities that V can give you when you're in Keening mode. You just need to be mindful and not let it get into the red where it becomes overmodulation. The second degree of Keening with V deals with kinetic hypnosis, and that deals with things like Kinsey's fascination and deep drinking, and that comes from, again, Keening with the V, and this can be, the issue is that this can be addictive though, and it can go into overdosing. So in this mode you have an impatience in moving. You want to move, and that's not necessarily an unhealthy thing, again, just like with all these when we talk about Keening here, unless you go into that overdosing mode where it's really not serving its purpose as part of your peak pathway. The third degree of Keening with V deals with being childlike, and by that we mean when you're using your V and you're in this mode of explosive ecstasy, unbridled enjoyment, bodacious bliss. So there's a big upside to that, because you're just feeling this in the moment rush and bliss. The cons though is when there's a lack of urge control. If basically when you become mercurial, and you're changing as the environment changes, you have lack of urge control. So if things are become unpleasant, then the child can become the enfant terrible, and you engage in human versus nature, or human versus world at large, and that's a theme that can happen when mojos that have V in their conscious, when they and for you as a Xyy'nai in particular, when you overmodulate with your V, these are issues that can come up in the third degree of Keening, and you need to be aware of them. And finally we have Xy, another modulation power. So here we have extreme modulation that can make for Keening, and if it goes again too far, then it goes to overmodulation and stress lock. Things that can stimulate this are making, tactical 49-51 type decisions and using situational logic. There's a lot more to Xy, but again, like the other powers, the things that really tend to set it off are this, 49-51 tactical decision making, and using your situational logic powers, and that would make you start to keen. The first degree of Keening with Xy deals with pure criticism, your ability to do pure criticism, but that it can become severe and harsh and self-defeating. This is the first degree, and so this is basically for Xy. This is basically when Xy gives just a pure critique without any humanistic consideration at all. And you need to be able to have the ability to do that. That's part of your peak pathway. So now pure criticism can be great because because you may need to make dispassionate calls, but when it goes into overmodulation it's going to be keening, because you're going to be giving criticism that's going to be biting. And so that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it can be and can go into overmodulation if it's too severe to be productive. And in that case, you're actually going to be, it's going to be unproductive. And that's when it goes into overmodulation mode. The second degree of Keening with Xy deals with logical labyrinths. The issue is that those can become traps to yourself and or others who are actually, trying to move the Zez forward. So Xy is very good at making prototype constructs to figure things out, but you need to watch out if this is not being modulated properly with your Xy. So what needs to be watched out for is making the experimentation or theorizing but not the resultant, so you kind of lock yourself up in a game world in your head, and the game becomes a trap instead of a teaching tool that gives you impetus. However, there's a drug-like quality, can be a drug-like quality that that you're going to feel in creating and kind of getting lost in these logical labyrinths at times when you're fetishing in order to run deductive experiments. But at that point, when it becomes a trap, you're taking the experimentation to the extreme, which is Keening, and it's a spectrum. It can be ultra powerful as long as it doesn't, again, become a trap in your own mind and doesn't go into overmodulation and stress lock. The third degree of Keening with Xy deals with purging, and this is good as long as it doesn't go into the overmodulation spectrum of turning very ruthless on oneself or others. So purging is the intense desire of making oneself clean, pure, untainted, uncorrupted, unfettered. At times this is exactly what you need to do. Sometimes you need to cut loose what's corrupt or holding you back, but it can go into overmodulation and stress lock if you actually sever ties and attachments that were actually useful for you, or purge useful information. So again, being aware of what's happening to you and not letting it take over you to the point where you're not realizing, it's like a train and it's just taking over you, it's just going and you're not realizing what's happening and not being consciously part of the process. So there's a lot to Keening and stress lock, but that was about that. That's how the powers experience Keening and the degrees of it. So now let's talk about some key concepts that come with Keening and stress lock and those kinds of things. So one of them is the warning system. The warning system is the way if everything is going well, be notified that there are issues. So that's generally going to be coming from your momentum powers down. So your Xy for you will start getting a little off flavor. So you're not going to be noticing much else going on at this point. So you're going to be highly up on your powers. The Xy is feeling strong, but it's starting to turn a little bit uncomfortable, and that can be an indication, but that's also the easiest for you to fix. You'll be able to handle a lot of energy in this area. If you're starting to see that your Xy is not as good as it could be, you can start adjusting it. You have a lot of abilities and confidence to do so. As it goes down from the Nai to the V to the Xy, it becomes more extreme to where you're being alerted by your psyche at this point. So your Nai is going to say to your Xy, seriously, I'm having problems here. And if the Nai isn't taken care of, then the V will kick in. And if it's still not handled, then the Xy will kick in to take care of it. So the stress is getting more extreme as it's not being handled by the power in charge, the source power of Xy. Another way of understanding it is in reverse, which is if you become stressed acutely, very quickly you'll start having part of your peak pathway shut down. It shuts down in reverse. So what will happen is if you're in a vulnerable spot, acute vulnerable hits are going to go first to your polar power first. So your polar is most sensitive with being hit with stuff, and it gets knocked off line the quickest. So for you, the Xy polar is the most sensitive to attack generally, and it gets knocked off line the easiest. And then your power of V, and then the Nai, and then the Xy. So it goes from your Xy down as far as being healthily aware something is happening and having opportunities to do something before it goes to the next stage of severity. But if you're taking damage energetically and your system is shutting down, it'll shut down in reverse order. It'll shut down from the polar going up to the source. The source is going to be the last to go offline because it's the strongest and the heart of Sanamya. Another important concept is fetishing. Fetishing allows for you as a Xyy'nai to use a high amount of energy safely and efficiently. This often has to do with your modulation powers, and this gets you two things. So one is if you have fetishes with your V and your Xy, it means when you do those particular V and Xy specialized versions of those specific activities, you won't spend as much energy. So since you don't spend as much energy and you're a higher level in them, than you are, for example, in general V and Xy stuff, it's not going to send you into overmodulation as easily because you can handle more on that particular specialized kind of V and Xy. So also fetishing really allows you to line up your modulations with your momentum, which means that you can pick up extreme amounts of momentum and have fetish design modulators to handle that. So it isn't just the general V and Xy, it's the V and Xy that you're particularly good at and is designed to pipeline down the massive amount of energy that you're building up with your momentum powers of Xyy'nai. Another term you'll hear us use is locked up, which is related to stress lock. Stress lock means that you're doing keening to the point of overmodulation, so you're taking damage, penalties, you're losing performance capabilities because of it. However, once you would stop doing it, then you would go back to being okay. Kind of like, you're in the gym, and if you're working out too hard and feel your muscles, burning or getting a cramp, then you can stop doing what you were doing and it'll get better. So that's stress lock. You've pushed it to where your performance is being compromised, but you can back off and recover. So being locked up, though, means that you've injured yourself to the point that you're going to need to do rehabilitation. You can't just stop what was causing the overmodulation and wait till it gets better on its own. You'll actually have to take special measures in order for it to get better. So, what are those special measures? Well, there's a lot to it. Podler theory deals with all aspects, and it's an ongoing research project as well. But to start, you want to go with resetting your peak pathway. And a really good way to do that is to do a few activities such as, mojo reading, hanging out in your own temple, and with other social alchemy such as, inspirationals and augmentation, and it basically immerses you with the correct math. And that can help reboot your system to go back online, and it'll have its factory settings, your factory settings go back into place, and your peak pathway will start cruising along like it's supposed to. So that's something for you to try if you've gotten into that territory of stress locked. So I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you learned some about keening and the aspects of keening. Ask any questions that you have about keening and stress lock in the comments section. And till next time, and in the meanwhile, know yourself, grow yourself, save the world.